I was in the middle of eating a Nutter Butter.
Hey, thanks for joining the Escape With Me Book Club. Escape with me, Lizzie Sawyer.
And me, Sam Reiner.
Into our most recent read. Come with us as we evade reality and dive into a new book. We're going to be covering it from beginning to end, so remember, there will be spoilers.
Today we're going to Castle Redmont, first released in Australia on November 1st, 2005, and later released in the United States on June 16th, 2005. John Flanagan throws his hat into the ring of young adult fantasy. Will is a young ward who fears that he will spend the rest of his life tending the fields as a farmhand. Instead, he is swept into the world of the Rangers, learning the ways of quiet tracking and ranged attacks. Little does he know that outside of his training, the kingdom is about to go to war and face an opponent that was long thought extinct, both the monsters and the man behind the recent attacks. Why don't you give the background on this one?
Background for this book, we were in the young adult section trying to find books that we'd read as kids that we thought would be good for first couple episodes to kind of get our feet wet. And I saw this book and I picked it up and my brain went, yeah, I read this as a kid, right? The Ranger's Apprentice. Once I actually started to read this book, and Sam was already halfway through it, this is not the book that I thought it was. This is The Ranger's Apprentice by John Flanagan. The book that I thought this was that would have been a much better read, in my opinion, was The Last Apprentice, which, might I say, the font is in a very similar fashion as The Ranger's Apprentice, and it's written by Joseph Delaney. And on the cover of both of these books is a man in a dark robe holding a lantern. So, easy mistake, but this is not the book that I had thought that it was, but Sam was already halfway through it, and so we read it anyway.
Yeah, I think that is one of the dangers. When it's a book in the same genre and the same target audience age, they have certain tropes that they tend to go to so that the reader knows, hey, I'm interested in this because it looks like a young adult fantasy, because things like young adults a lot of times have people on the cover, whereas adults will have symbols and things like that. So there are usually tropes that go along with these. This is an example of they overlapped so much that we accidentally picked up this book, which is a little bit part of the genius of it as well.
I was expecting a nice, fun, spooky story, and that is not what I got, because this is not the book that I thought it was.
Well, so it's gonna be fun, because obviously we know what you thought it was based on the cover.
Yeah, I thought it was a book about a kid that gets swept up into the world of spooks, which is a completely different thing.
When I saw this, it's called The Runes of Gorland. It's the first in a series. And I think we probably had a reprint because it mentions a whole bunch of other ones, and it's like Ranger's Apprentice series. And I've mentioned in the past how a lot of times when you get a series, it's because you've proven that your story is profitable, and then they'll come back and say, hey, we want a series out of this, and then later on they'll market it as a series because readers really enjoy series reading. So this is probably definitely a reprint. But it's this dude, he's in blue, his face is mainly covered, and then there's a little bit of ruins on the side. So what I thought it was going to be, I thought it was going to be a secret society thing, and they all meet in the ruins of Gorland, and either the hero has to defeat them and whatever they're trying to summon, or the hero joins them and they go on adventures and try to summon things and try to thwart other people trying to stop them or something like that. And I definitely thought there would be much more focus on the runes of Gorland, because if you're going to name your book after it, you would expect to see it much sooner than the last third of the book. Maybe even last fourth of the book? It doesn't really come up. And it doesn't feel nearly as important. I mean, it's set up to be very important, but it doesn't end up feeling as important because it shows up near the very end and plays a very minimal role in everything.
Yeah, it's at the very end.
Let's get into it. Now we join Will as he and his ward mates discuss tomorrow's choosing ceremony. So I actually talked to my husband about this book because I mentioned to him on how typically dystopias, which is much, much more in his field, have choosing days like this. So things like The City of Ember or The Giver or just about any other YA dystopian books always starts with a choosing ceremony where you get your job or you get something where it's like your life is chosen for you at that point, basically. And a lot of the people either conform to that and become really good or they rebel against it. It's a bunch of that. And so I was talking to him about why this is, and I mentioned how this is a fantasy book, but it still has that trope. And he mentioned it probably has something more to do with it being a young adult book, because things like teenagers, that's basically about to happen happen to them. They're going to have to choose a college, they're going to choose a degree, they're going to choose a job to go into. And so that's something they can relate with, is their whole life is before them, but they're about to have to make choices that can affect the rest of their life. And so they tend to gravitate toward this trope because they really feel it. And I was like, okay, that made me feel a lot better about it because I've read it so many times and I'm actually kind of bored with the trope. But considering who the audience is, I thought it made a lot more sense.
Definitely. Yeah, I see this a lot in young adult books, especially when the kids don't have parents and so don't have either a family profession to take up on or people to support them in whatever life goal they decide they want to go on towards. It's a common trope for things like that as well.
Yeah, so that definitely made it a lot better, but not great still. Thankfully, the choosing day happens really soon and they get moving on. Let's talk about our main character for a little bit. Our main character doesn't have a last name. All of his other ward mates have last names. And essentially what the Baron of the castle has set up is if your parents die in service to the kingdom, your child can come there and instead of being impoverished for the rest of their life, they have a potential to join a very high position or a career and be able to have an opportunity to become a knight or become a diplomat or become a cook. That was a weird one to be thrown in, but something higher than just to be impoverished their whole life and not have anybody watch after them.
That one girl getting picked as a chef really pissed me off. Not because she got picked as a chef, but because they played off of the fact that she has a heavier weight set than a lot of other people and used that as an excuse for her to be a cook.
Well, one thing I liked about her is because a lot of times when they have these characters, they're, first of all, they're never desirable. They don't make them desirable. But from the moment you meet Jenny, Will says that she's pretty. And that's a theme throughout the entire book. Horace, you learn later, has a huge crush on Jenny. And Will kind of has a little bit of a crush on her too. So that was something I actually really liked, is they had her, she was a little heavier weight. Elise was the skinny one, the traditionally skinny one. But that didn't mean she wasn't attractive. She was attractive because she had a passion for what she did and she was very pretty. I kind of like that.
No, I like that too. And that's a good point. However, I still don't like the fact that part of the reason they accepted her into the Cooking Guild was on the fact that she was a heavier set chick.
I took that more as a joke, mainly because it was coming from Jenny herself. She was like, clearly I have the figure for it. It felt more like a joke to me.
I already didn't like this book because it had so many things over-explained to me at this point that I didn't.
I didn't worry about that too much. The way they treat Jenny as a character, I really liked how Jenny was treated, even though they don't show up super much. Because basically the main characters are Will and Horace. And like I said, Will was the orphan boy that doesn't have a last name. He doesn't know who his parents are. The rest of them know who their parents are, at least. They have a last name. So Will gets teased about it by Horace. Horace is a little bit of a bully to him. They kind of fight like cats and dogs. They're just different personalities and they clash. And they're young boys who don't know how to express their feelings. So they fight a lot. So those two are the kind of the main characters and the focus for a good bit of the book. I will actually say I kind of liked Horace's story better than Will's.
I completely agree with that. I definitely liked Horace's story more than Will's.
Because Will doesn't do anything until the last half of the book. Maybe last third, because he really doesn't do anything until the very end, whereas Horace, from the very beginning, he's in training, it's hard, it's something he wanted to do, but he's getting bullied, and the way they portray the bullying is very true to life, and Horace's reasoning behind not reporting the bullying also makes sense, because he's convinced, oh, this is just part of it.
I mean, yeah, because it just kind of sounds like freshman hazing.
Yeah.
It sounds like a normal thing.
And so to him, he's like, oh, this is just hazing, it's fine, all the actual knights are probably in on it, it's fine. Where he doesn't realize that hazing is actually not approved by anybody, but the outside world, Horace is a great fighter and stuff, but he's not very good at school, and so it gets to this point where the bullying comes so bad is he might be kicked out of school because he doesn't have the time or energy to focus on the school work that goes along with it, which I also kind of liked that knight training didn't just involve fighting, because to be a knight you need to have some sort of intelligence and understanding of battle techniques. So I kind of like that, because I feel like that gets skipped a lot in books. Like, if you're a knight, oh, you just fight, or you just joust, or whatever.
Not the books I read, but I read good books.
I'm probably thinking more movies in general, too.
Probably.
Whereas Will's an idiot, and he has to get things explained to him a lot
Yeah.
that shouldn't.
Which is mostly so that the author can explain it to the reader, but it's created a character that's quite dumb.
For example, when they're talking about weapons, this whole time Will really wanted to get into battle school, and he doesn't get into battle school because he's kind of a runt. He's short, he's skinny, he doesn't really have macho for it, which fine, I get that. So instead, he gets into the Rangers because first of all, they spend so much at the beginning of the book being like, oh, he's really quiet. Oh, he knows how to walk across a courtyard without being noticed.
Oh, he can climb up things that he really shouldn't be able to climb.
Yeah, and he does all of these things. And then he's like, but why did you choose me? What did I do? It's like, you're such an idiot. You spent the entire first part of the book explaining why you're perfect for the Rangers, and now you have to get explained to again why you are perfect for the Rangers. And then later on, when he's handing out weapons, Will really wants a sword because he wanted to be a knight because he thought his father was a knight and wanted to follow in his footsteps, which is actually quite sentimental, and I liked that idea.
Even though that's something that he's come up with himself, he was only really told that his father died in battle.
Yeah, which I think they explain it really well. It's basically something he told himself to get through to the next day because he didn't know who it was. And anyway, but Halt is going to show him weapons, and so he wants a sword, and it's not a sword, and then it's a bow, and then he's disappointed and acts like it's not a real weapon. Dude,
it's that double back bow thing we have nowadays.
Yeah,
and those things can shoot quite a ways. They're powerful little buggers.
He lived in a castle. You cannot tell me he didn't at least know that, hey, the knights on the wall use bows and arrows. Even later on, it talks about how rangers are taught differently than knights, who are taught to just shoot a lot, whereas rangers are taught to shoot with accuracy. You know this is a weapon. Why are you acting dumb so they can explain, well, actually, the bow and arrow is a very good weapon to use. I think it also doesn't help that this came out in 2005, and by this point in 2020, we're so saturated in the media with bow and arrow users. So there's a little lenience on it came out in 2005, and things like The Hunger Games didn't come out, and Link and The Legend of Zelda wasn't as popular, and I feel nowadays everybody has a bow and arrow, but back in the time they may or may not. But that was a hard pill to swallow, that this boy didn't know that a bow and arrow can be a deadly weapon. And then Holt had to not only explain it, but showcase that it's a deadly weapon. I don't know who he was trying to convince there.
Us?
No clue.
The author himself. No clue.
But that's kind of what I mean by Will is dumb, is things will happen, and it's really obvious why they happen. But he's like, but why did that happen? Would you just stop being dumb?
It's like when someone will say something or do something in the narration. For instance, someone will look sidelong at somebody else, and the author immediately is like, and from that look, this person can tell that the other person is thinking this. You don't need, in the context of what was just said, that's really obvious. You don't, just stop, please, stop.
That was one thing. The narration, the point of view is very confusing.
The point of view, did you notice that the narrator changes periodically when it's convenient for the author? It's mostly Will, but then it changes.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The first 3 chapters is Will. So I'm thinking it's third person limited, which is basically you have a narrator. It's like first person view, but instead of saying I, me, it's Will, such and such. But starting around the choosing day, which is about a couple chapters in, it randomly switched to the Baron's thoughts.
But only for like a little bit.
And so suddenly it becomes third person omniscient. Omnipotent. I can't pronounce things.
Omnipotent?
No, it's like Omniscient.
Oh yeah, I had no clue. When 2 dyslexic people look at the same word.
My husband's gonna be so disappointed.
Your husband will know what the word is.
Exactly, that's why he'll be disappointed.
Omniscient.
Omniscient. That is how we're going. I always thought it was omnipotent. I thought you were right. Well,
omnipotent may be a different context word.
Yeah, well, so omniscient is knowing everything. It's an adjective. So I think omnipotent is a noun? I don't know. I'm probably wrong there too. Anyway, so it'll do that very randomly though. It doesn't seem consistent. It'll be like every once in a while. One place where it's used well is after Will completes this test of sneaking into a place where he's not supposed to and getting a letter. The Baron wants to talk to him about stuff, and it mentions in the Baron's thoughts, he makes a lot of jokes, but because he's a Baron, people don't get it and take everything he says seriously. And so he kind of laments about that. And then later on, he says something and Will takes him super seriously. And then it mentions that the Baron kind of rolls his eyes and Will's confused why he did that. And so that was a good use of it because you, the reader, have some dramatic irony where you know what's going on, but the narrator doesn't necessarily. But a lot of times it'll just switch to them to explain a look, like you said, where it'd be like, Sir Rodney looked at the Baron and the Baron understood immediately that it meant this. And then it'll go back to Will's perspective. It doesn't really make sense.
You don't need to do that.
It's a little jarring. I feel like that could have been...
It's not a necessary thing that you need to do. I mean, just because you're writing to kids doesn't mean that the kids aren't going to know basic social cues.
Or that it's necessarily needed. Do we actually need to know what that look means? If we did, Will could ask, or somebody could explain it to him. But it's very jarring. Especially in the beginning. I don't think it's done to its full effect. He could get better at it. I mean, he sold a lot of books since then, so he probably gets a lot better about it. But at least in this first book, it's really jarring, and I didn't think it was necessary, and it was more distracting more than anything else.
It was very distracting. It made me super not like this book.
Yeah, it's very jarring. It wasn't great. But the first half of the book, so Horace is going through all that, and it ends up being resolved when the three bullies are idiots and are like, instead of just bullying this one kid we know we can get away with, let's go beat up the ranger's apprentice. That won't be an issue.
Yeah, but he humiliated the night program, and so he needs to be taught a lesson.
Yeah, but that was the one thing they became idiots about, because up until then, they had been very careful to bully Horace so nobody would take notice. But I guess they just got this superiority complex and were like, we can get away with whatever we want. But that was really dumb of them, to go to a completely different place where they don't know what's going on or anything. And then, of course, Holt shows up and defends Will. And then it's a really long, drawn-out scene. Like, I kind of enjoyed it in the beginning, where it was like, oh, Holt beat up a dude, and he's letting Horace beat up a dude. Now the other dude, we're going back to the first dude again, and we gotta keep going with this revenge fantasy is taking a very long time.
It's like this went from revenge to now a teacher is having a student beat up other kids.
Yeah. And it was gratifying in the beginning. It's like, yeah, Horace, he gets his turn. I was kind of half expecting Will to take on the third guy, so it's like everybody gets somebody. But to have all three of them, and it's one-on-one, so it's not all three of them at once or anything. It tries to attack the one dude. The dude tries to squirm out of it. But he can't squirm out of it. Horace beats him up. He's gotta fight the second dude. The second dude tries to weasel himself out. He can't, so Horace beats him up. The third dude, who's already been beat up by Holt, is like, dude, we get it. Can we just move on? Why is this...
No, gotta take the revenge. Gotta draw the revenge out.
John, were you bullied as a child? Is this your payback?
Maybe. Wouldn't be surprised.
Is that what is happening here? And that explains a lot of scenes, where it starts off, you think it's going to be really good, and he has a lot of really good ideas, but they're so drawn out, and the pacing is so freaking slow. Nothing happens for so much of the book, and then we finally get to the end and to interesting things, but it's only a couple of chapters because he spent so much time on Will's training and Horace being bullied and then not being bullied, and then we never go back to Horace.
Yeah. As soon as Horace stops being bullied, we don't really revisit that at all.
Yeah, we see him at the end when he's like happy about Will, but that's kind of it. And there are things that get brought out that you get really excited for, but because he spends so much time on filler, they don't ever come to anything. For example, Will and Horace have a huge blow up in the middle of the book. They go to blows, and then Sir Rodney shows up, who's the head of the battle school, and separates them and is like, hey, don't do that anymore. And it's this huge thing about Will knows in his gut that one day, even though they aren't crossing paths anymore, that, oh, it's gonna be this big thing when they see each other. And then
it's not.
And then it's not. Like, Horace gets invited to a boar fight. Will and Horace are like, oh, cool, this is cool that we're both allowed to do this. And then Will saves his life. And then Horace vows his ever servitude. What was the point of that buildup? There was no resolution. I think it would have been better if during the war hunt, if Horace and Will were still mad at each other, and then Will put that aside and saved his life, like, that would have been really meaningful. But they were already awkwardly weirdly better.
He's like, hey, bro, cool. Yeah, you here too?
Yeah, we both here. This is kind of cool, isn't it? And then that happens. And so there's no payout for this huge buildup of they never got along before, and then Horace getting more violent because he's being bullied, and so he wants to take this anger that he doesn't know how to vent any other way and put it out on somebody else. He starts putting it out on Will. Will is able to fight back now.
And nothing ever comes of that.
And then nothing ever comes of it. Now they're suddenly best buddies, and it's great and fine and perfect, and we never have to worry about them ever again. That was lame.
It was very lame.
Along with that, George was a waste of a character.
Oh, the guy with stage fright?
Yeah, the guy who has stage fright, and then he goes to scribe school, and then he's suddenly able to talk again, and that's all his part.
Maybe he has a bigger part in later book.
That's the only thing I could figure is he has some sort of setup. But looking at this book alone, he was a waste of space.
Yep.
Ginny and Elise were cute, though. I liked them. I hope they're bigger parts in other books.
Yes.
I don't know if I'm actually going to read it, because I didn't end the book and be like, I hate this book so much I will never read it again. I am curious about some things that happen, but at the same time, it's more of a, I have better things to do.
Yep.
Not necessarily, I will never read this book or anything like that.
I'll probably never read this book again.
Well, I'm not going to read this book again. It's just more of continuing on the series and being invested in these characters. Because like I said, he has a lot of really good ideas. And I do like the world he starts to finally build at the end. But the pacing kills me.
The pacing is awful.
It's 250 pages and it probably could have been 150. That sucks.
Yep.
But Ginny and Elise, Horace has a crush on Ginny. Will ends up realizing that he has a crush on his old friend Elise because they've been in the wards since the very first day, basically, together. And then everyone else joined them. And Elise kisses Will, and oh my goodness, they're so cute. I kind of actually like the romance because it's both age appropriate and adorable. Because I think all that happens is Horace really wants Ginny to be cheering him when he's a knight and doing knightly things. And then later on, he dances with her. And then Elise kisses Will. And it's very cute. It's very age appropriate. They're turning 15. So yeah, it'd be a little weird if they got into more than that. That'd be weird to read about. It's very cute. They do a really good job. They don't spend a lot of time together, so they build up these romances separately. And I think he actually does a pretty good job because I feel like a lot of lesser writers would drag out the romance and make it more than it is. But it's basically both of them are a slow ember that they will eventually probably burn into something. And I think that's an appropriate place to leave it for a first book.
I don't really have an opinion on the romance in this book.
You never have an opinion on the romance.
I have an opinion on the romance when I care about the romance. I didn't care about this one at all.
Fair.
And it didn't take much time. It was a very small portion of the book.
It was.
For instance, I just gushed about the romance in the video game that we're both playing.
True.
Because I care about that one. I don't care about the romance in this book.
That's fair. I don't know. I'm a person who likes a little bit of romance in my non-romance book versus a romance book.
I'd rather a romance book.
I just need a little bit of it. I just need it for it to be cute, and I'm good.
Yeah, I prefer romance books over having a little bit of romance in a book. But for books that I feel that romance isn't necessarily needed, it can be cute, and I don't not like it. And I don't feel that it doesn't need to be there. It's just, if I had to pick between one or the other, I'd pick a romance book.
I feel like I want a book about the Guild's Masters more than I want a book about the apprentices. Because Halt and Sir Rodney and the Baron are extremely interesting people.
And seem friendly with each other, like they're old D&D characters that went on an adventure and now they've retired.
And the DM brought them back, so the players have an automatic connection with them. Yeah.
Yes.
And the Baron works with Halt a lot, and Sir Rodney and Halt have a healthy respect of each other, and they work together at the end, and it would have been very interesting. And I don't want a book like, oh, tell me about the battle that happened 15 years. I don't want that. I don't want that book. This book basically covers what that book would be. So I don't necessarily want that, but I would love something with just those three and not necessarily the apprentices because they're already fleshed out really well versus I feel like a lot of times YA characters don't get as intense of a personality so the reader can put themselves into the characters, and that's also why I think there are a bunch of them instead of just one or two, because that way you can find a character that you're like, oh, I'm so much like them, and so you keep reading and whatever.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I don't like about YA, because I like reading characters that have a bigger personality. I tend to like people with a bigger personality in general.
Cough, dude, one.
but there's a lot about Will that's a little bit of a blank slate. And that might be another reason I like Horace's moments, because he has a pretty big personality. You get to feel his thoughts a lot. Like, he is rather emotionally intelligent, or at least the narrator talking about Horace is a very emotionally intelligent, versus when it's talking about Will, he's kind of a blank slate. He doesn't have too many emotions.
And he's kind of dim.
Yeah, he has dreams and ambitions, but not really a way to get there. And he's just like, yeah, I'm gonna ask a bunch of questions and train, and that is my personality. Which, can we talk about one thing I noticed about Holt? When he was explaining to Will what all of the reasons that he thought he would be a good ranger, one of them was because he's inquisitive, and then he spends the rest of the book trying to squash the fact that he's inquisitive.
He answers all the questions that we hear Will ask. Will just complains about how Holt sometimes doesn't answer his questions.
Yeah, but every time he does, the narrator's always like, and Holt's like, oh, he's asking questions again. Ugh. You picked him knowing he asked questions. What is your excuse here? You wanted him because he asked questions. What did you expect to happen? Him to just not ask questions? If asking questions is actually a problem for a ranger because you need to listen and learn before you ask questions, being inquisitive would not be a good thing.
Yep. Author didn't think that one through.
No, and I think it was just supposed to be the personality type, the wise mage dealing with the rookie, and it makes a difference when at the end Holt is proud of him and he smiles and is like, okay, but if that's the relationship you're going for, don't set up, hey, this is something I like about you, I'm going to nurture this and make it into a great quality for you, and instead go, I'm going to squash this at any turn because you're annoying.
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense.
I swear every time Will asks a question, Holt's like, ugh, we get the point. Holt doesn't like questions. Stop doing it every time. And you see by the end of the book, Will straight up will stop asking him questions. That is just squelching it.
You've squished his personality down. Good job.
The thing you wanted is now gone. Good job.
A person that could potentially think for himself and ask important questions is now gone. Good job.
I'm surprised Holt made it through this book alive. Straight up. I thought he was going to die. Either him or the former apprentice. I thought one of them was going to die, straight up.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
I was also surprised that they didn't decide to bring Horace to the ruins, because that felt like a book thing to do. Okay, you're totally inexperienced, but you're kind of a main character, so you need to be there.
We've built all this emotional value in you, so you kind of need to be there.
But yeah, so I was surprised they made it through. Old Bob was a weird character.
I completely forgot about Old Bob, because you only really see him, maybe twice?
With the horses? Yeah. And it's hilarious, because he's like, he's gonna make a great ranger because he called me sir. What? No.
I don't know if that's just basic common courtesy, but alright.
Holt calls no one sir at any point. How does this make him a great ranger?
I think that's the joke, maybe?
Well, then we get into the writing lessons, and oh my goodness, Will is Trixie Belden all over again.
If you think that's a smart thing to do.
Hey, I want to do this thing I'm not ready for. Makes it obvious he's not ready for it. Does the thing.
I mean, they say, if that's what you want to do. If you're stupid enough to fall for that one time, don't fall for it twice.
Yeah, because he does it once where it's like, oh, catch the horse. And then he's like, okay, I want to ride him. And it's like, okay, go ahead, try to get on the horse. And then the horse throws him. Dude.
And he has a moment where he's kind of like, that phrasing sounds familiar. Oh, well. No. Use the 2 brain cells that God gave you, rub them together, and think.
If you're going to do that, at least make it so that's the only thing he does, because the reason he does that is foreshadowing for later on when Horace tries to ride the horse, and it doesn't work, and you're like, oh, this is why it doesn't work. But what was the point of catching the ranger's horse if you were going to make him idiot of himself later on?
To show that he's really quite dumb.
Apparently.
If it wasn't clear before, let me reiterate, this character is quite dumb. Then why is he our main character? I'm so confused.
Because it's called The Ranger's Apprentice, which, by the way, the title ruins so much of this book. It's hard in the first 3 chapters to be like, oh no, what guild is he going to get into when it's called The Ranger's Apprentice?
At least with the last apprentice, you don't know apprentice of what until you get into it.
Yeah, and so it's like all that, and then it shows up rangers. He's like, oh no, I'm going to get into battle school. It's like, no, you're going to be a ranger. He's like, oh no, I didn't get into battle school. What's that note? You're going to be a ranger.
You're a ranger.
Oh no, I've been caught. They're gonna throw me out. No, you're going to be a ranger. Oh my goodness.
Oh, the whole sneaking into the room thing. I was like, he's gonna be up there waiting for you. The note probably doesn't actually say anything on it. They did that so you would sneak into the room.
Oh yeah, I was convinced it was gonna be like, you've been caught, or welcome to the Rangers, or something like that. And guess what?
That's essentially what it was.
And he's like, oh, I looked around and no one was there. And then Holt shows up. He's like, oh no, I forgot Holt is invisible.
Oh no, I forgot that this human can do inhuman things because his coat and his weird colors.
Which I think that would have been really funny as a Invader Zim level of humor. Oh no, I forgot you could be invisible. Thwarted again.
Yes.
But can we also talk about how every other old man is basically a clone of old Bob?
Yes.
Especially Saltpeter. We meet Saltpeter, and I was convinced it was old Bob again.
You know, I wrote my most extensive notes for this entire thing is about the guy that they meet on the road, the old farmer. And I didn't write very many notes about this.
It was kind of funny, though, to see Holt get annoyed at somebody beside Will.
Oh, I take that back. Okay, no, I apparently didn't write anything about the old man like I thought I was.
Lies.
Well, see, I listen to the book while I'm in the shower, too, and I think about notes that I want to take, and I talk to the book out loud, and then when I get out of the shower, I forget to actually write down the things that I shouted at the book while it was playing. Oh, no, there it is. Yeah, no, the only thing I wrote for him is, why would you follow a boar you didn't want to see?
Logic.
No, why would you follow a boar you didn't want to see? You just went from, I don't want to see it to, I'm following it so that someone can take care of it, but... Maybe just go get somebody?
Why didn't you go to the castle immediately and be like, hey, brave knights, we are having this issue? No, you're just following it in the hope somebody comes along.
And then when someone comes along, he hides. He's super sketchy. The book never discusses how sketchy this guy really is. He's super sketchy.
He's really weird.
You'd be like, yeah, no, whatever.
But can we talk about how this just straight up feels like an MMO RPG quest?
Oh yeah, especially with the NPC being like, oh no, you're not Holt, there's no way. That sounds like a DM trolling his players.
Well, it does that. This random dude gives you a quest. You go over to fight it. You get in this fight. You kill a boar. Oh, super secret. Second boss boar coming out now. And you have to fight that one by yourself.
You can hear the roller perception check.
Or, like I said, in an MMORPG, you're forced to go with an NPC, and you're fighting the thing, and the NPC kills it, and it's like, oh yeah, we killed it. And it's like, no.
And then the battle music starts up again in the background, and there's a cutscene.
I am the chosen one. I am forced to do everything for this. Something's up. An NPC that was competent? No. Something's coming.
I hope my voice conveys the different expressions that I'm making as we go through things like this. Because I make a lot of weird expressions and a lot of weird head turns, like I'm looking at a camera off to the side.
I just thought that was so funny. I was like, I am reading a video game.
Yeah, I mean, I just went through that. I defeated the boss, and then I defeated the boss, and then the boss floats up in the air and fuses with this persona, and you're like, oh no, another cutscene, more battle!
To another boss! And you know for a fact, if you fail right there, you have to go back to the beginning and do every single phase. There's supposed to be this gathering where Will is supposed to be tested so he can become a second-year apprentice instead of a first year, which I think is a pretty interesting concept. I hope they actually do that in later books.
Oh, we're only to this part of this book.
Yeah.
I thought the boar was like way further in.
I don't know. Like I said, there's not that much that happens. Because the gathering happens, they get there, oh, something's happening, which they find out this dude is coming back to attack him. He fought 15 years ago and whatever, and this was the point where I realized that the prologue was not a good choice.
No.
Because I talked about in Big Little Lies, they do a prologue, and it's actually very good because it gets you already wondering, oh my goodness, what happens at the end of the book? And it's basically a framing device to be like 3 months from the trivia night, 2 months for that kind of thing. And so it's really good.
Whereas that the prologue in this book is very
exposition dump.
This is the bad guy. He's gonna start doing war again. So when you get to that part of the book and they're like, oh, a thing's happening, and you're like, oh,
not surprised.
Is it the bad guy? Is he gonna come declare war again?
Yeah, and there are things like in the prologue he mentions specifically such and such stopped him, and then later on Holt gets a report. It's like, oh, this dude was attacked by a bear. It's like, oh, cool, that dude killed him. I already know.
You're like, oh yeah, he's probably dead from a wargulls. You know, he was probably killed by a wargull.
And then you found out about the Calcara.
Yeah, I think that's how you say that. I wrote down Calcara - dreadful beast, whereas for War Girls, I wrote sickly and misshapen, but with a muzzle and fangs like a dog or bear, semi-intelligent, fears horses.
I thought they were dumb. Because basically his whole thing is, I control them mentally because my brain powers are stronger. And I'm like, oh, okay, so they're dumb.
They're semi-intelligent.
So is Will. We still call him dumb.
Yes. They're intelligent enough to be able to follow orders more readily than, like, actually, I guess dogs would be more intelligent than War Girls.
Yeah, but you wouldn't compare them necessarily to a human. I would compare these to humans because they tried to paint the picture like they're kind of humanoids and stuff. Anyway, so I feel like the prologue defeats the purpose. It falls into the trap of you start thinking one thing is going to happen, and then you spend 200 pages ignoring what that prologue was, and not in a, oh, we're building up to it, in a completely ignoring it, like it's not happening, and then all these things is like, oh no, who's doing the thing? It's like, dude, the guy from the beginning, I know who this is, you're wasting my time.
Oh no.
It would have been so much better if they just deleted the prologue and kept the amount of exposition that they did in the book, because you get everything explained to you in the beginning of the book, and then you get later on and Holt explains everything to Will. Again. And it's like, what was the point of the prologue? The prologue was boring.
If you ever have someone that says they want to read this book, tell them not to read the prologue.
All it was a bunch of name drops, which sucks because then you get into chapter 1 and in 6 pages you have 9 different names.
Yep.
It's just info dump, info dump, info dump. And I think that's a big problem with the pacing. And why it feels like he could be talking down to the audience is there's so many info dumps. Not a lot of showing, a lot of telling.
For real, though.
If you're going to have everything center around the ruins, like I said, if you're going to have it named after the ruins, don't come at me 200 page later being like, oh, this is this dude's old ruins. It's like, oh, that's on the way, but could they be going toward the castle? No, they're going toward the ruins. That's the title of the book. And then have the ruins be no different than if they were just random. They could have been a rock outcropping for all it was worth. And so it was supposed to be really cool because it was the evil dude's ruined castle. It should have meant something, but it didn't. It didn't have to be anything to do with it. So not only is the series name a huge spoiler, and especially at the end, where it's like, oh, Will, you can join battle school now if you want. It's like, I wonder if you chooses battle school in a series called The Ranger's Apprentice.
I wrote notes in all caps for that. Oh my goodness. The you can choose battle school now thing, I wrote in all caps for that. Or at least for the wise, it's surprising. Of course, he's a ranger. I think it's belittling what he did as a ranger.
It is.
And being like, oh yeah, you want to do this instead? You're like, no! He just did something amazing as a ranger. He's obviously really good at it. Why are you giving him the option and undermining what he just accomplished to do something else? And they even made a sword and a shield. Like, yeah, obviously he's going to choose to be a knight now instead. No!
And it doesn't make sense. It's like, oh, you're really good at a bow and arrow. You should totally come trained to use a sword. That makes sense. And also he invented fire arrows, which, like I said, it doesn't help that I played Legend of Zelda my entire childhood. So the entire time they're like, oh, their weakness is fire. I'm like, fire arrows.
Fire arrows.
Fire arrows.
Fire arrows.
Fire arrows. Why is no one thinking of this? And then Will creates fire arrows in the end. I'm like, okay, thank you. At least somebody came up with this. That was one thing. I was glad at least somebody thought of fire arrows. Because I was going to be so pissed if we got to the end of the book and they were like, oh, we threw a torch at him or something like that. I'm like, fire arrows! The entire book. Oh, their only weakness is flame. Fire arrows. Speaking of the runes, though, I enjoyed Holt's portion more than I enjoyed Will's.
Yes.
Which is another proof to me that I want a book with Holt as the main character.
Yes.
He's inventive, he's on his feet. It's exciting when you read him because he's not, I guess that is one of the things, he's not asking all these questions, he's just doing. He's had the training, he knows what he's doing. He's hiding, he's attacking their eyes, he's doing very specific things. He's like, here are my chances, this is what I'm doing. It really builds it up.
Reasons I wanted to read The Last Apprentice and was disappointed when we ended up reading this one instead by my own mistake.
Versus Will, who is a naive child and doesn't think of things like the odds and doesn't build things up and doesn't know what he's doing.
Which is unrealistic for a 15-year-old who's been training this much, to some extent. 15-year-olds are usually not this dumb.
Yeah, but their frontal lobe isn't fully developed, so they still have a invincibility complex. So that made sense to me.
True. However, I live with a 15-year-old.
It still made sense to me. Like, he's not as trained as Holt. Holt is, what, 50? I don't even know how old Holt is. But it was much more interesting to have Holt as a character. He builds suspense. He acts out of desperation. He feels like a real hero. Where Will kind of lucked out. And then it was kind of lame that the Baron was like, I would like to thank you, Will, and only Will, not Sir Rodney or Holt. Just you, Will.
Just you specifically. Also, change your jobs.
Also, change your job. Why didn't you change your job? I'm confused. It's like, I put you in Ranger.
They all gasped. He's like, no, I'm going to stay as a Ranger. And the whole crowd gasped. And I'm like, why is that surprising? It's obviously what he's good at and apparently enjoys doing.
Yeah, and the Baron's confused. And even though in the beginning of the book, he was the one talking Will into doing it. What?
Made me so angry. You just belittled his accomplishment. Even though you did this as a Ranger, it would have been better if you were a knight.
It would have made sense after the boar fight, being like, hey, you have a lot of courage and stuff. I think you could have been really good with a sword. Like, that would have made sense.
That went more in the context of, let's get you sword training on top of the Ranger training, not let's change your whole job now that you've done all the training for being a Ranger.
Yeah, and it's like, you're a year into this. Start battle school now. No.
You're into this. Here, start over.
And it doesn't change the problem that he's still too short. He's still too light. It doesn't change the fact that his strengths are being a ranger. And once again, this title is Ranger's Apprentice. And that becomes even more of a time waster because you're like, he's not going to choose to be a knight. He's not going to choose to be a knight. This is dumb.
And then the author wastes more time with having Will question his choice near the end.
The fact that Will questioned it rubbed me more raw than Sir Rodney offering it. Because I can see Sir Rodney, he's looking out for himself and his knights. And he's like, that dude is awesome. If I can enlist him, that would be a great catch. So, like, that made sense. But for Will to sit there like, should this be the thing I do? Even though I've proven over and over again that I much prefer being a ranger? No, don't.
And he only did it so that he could question Holt about his father.
I liked the epilogue. The epilogue was good. I thought that was well done. I actually liked the epilogue. I think it could have been a chapter. I don't know why it was specifically an epilogue. But the epilogue is basically they're talking about it, and Will's like, did I make the right choice? I wanted to follow in my footsteps with my father. And then he finds out that Holt knew his father. And then there's this great reveal that this dude saved somebody selflessly, and it's like, oh my gosh, that's so awesome. And then you find out that Will's father saved Holt, and so Holt brought him to the castle, and that's why he wanted to be his apprentice from the very beginning, is because his father saved his life and was a hero.
Oh, also, his father wasn't ever a knight. He was a general in the army.
So he finds out, yeah, he was just a sergeant, and he saved Holt's life. And so he wasn't this great big knight that Will thought he was, but in a way, he's even greater than Will ever thought. And that was a cute moment. It even mentioned at the end, he finally felt peace with everything because he understood the full story. I liked that. That was a good ending. I consider epilogues as optional. That's why it's an epilogue and not a chapter. And so I don't know why it wasn't a chapter.
Oh, like the epilogue for Big Sky Secrets that I didn't read.
Yeah, it's not part of the book. It's supposed to be this extra added on ending. And so I don't know why it was its own chapter, because that, to me, that feels more like the real ending of the book than he chose not to be a soldier and Holt smiled at him. So that felt like the true ending. That was the true ending of the video game. We defeated the secret special boar boss, and now we get the true ending. I think that's honestly all there is to really talk about. Not a lot happens, but it's 250 pages, and like I said, the pacing is so slow. It's just to its disadvantage to have such a slow-paced book. And like I said, not a lot happens. Will gets chosen as a ranger's apprentice. He trains. Horace is bullied. Then Horace isn't bullied because Holt helps him with his bullies. There's the boar hunt also in there, just thrown in there. Now that I think about it, really doesn't add much other than, oh, we fixed Will and Horace's relationship without actually putting any effort into it. Then there's the gathering, and oh no, that one dude. Okay, guys, we gotta go track them. Oh, we're getting a fight. Oh, we're gonna die. Oh, and fire arrow. You should become a knight.
I'm telling you, The Last Apprentice is way better.
Just not a lot happens, and there could have been really good points in this book. He has a lot of really good ideas. I think the ideas of different guilds really could have played up more, because it's basically the ones we're introduced to: battle school, so you can be a knight, which is really cool; ranger, where you can be a ranger, which is really cool; And then cooking, scribe making, and diplomacy. And then they mentioned, oh yeah, there's also blacksmith, but he didn't need an apprentice.
Yeah.
I feel like that really could have been played up more than it was.
Blacksmith apprentice would have been cool.
That would have been cool. But instead we got scribes.
Yeah.
I guess that's a guild.
Yeah. Woo, scribes.
Woo.
I don't know. I know a scribe in D&D and he's pretty cool.
Still. But yeah, the pacing is to its detriment. There's a lot of really good ideas here, but I don't think they ever really hit because of the pacing. And the main character is too blank of a personality for my interest. He has a lot of thoughts. He doesn't have a lot of emotions or happenings and doings. He's a little too blank for me.
I can completely agree with that. This book is actually really boring.
Yeah, which sucks because looking at it and reading the blurb on the back, you think it's going to really build up something. And then even with the prologue, it builds it up to be something it's not. And that's just a shame. And I know this is the first book in the series, but all we can look at right now is this one book. And do you want to continue in the series or not? Because that's basically what the first book should do in a series, is make you want to read the entire series. And
you know what? I'm good. I don't think I'll read any more of these.
Yeah. And like I said, maybe one day I'll be like, hey, whatever happened. But at the same time, I have a feeling in a couple months I'll forget this book existed.
Yep. Other than looking back at old episodes.
Yeah. So it's kind of a shame. There are things in it that I really like. I like the romance. I'd like to see how that blossoms. I'd like to learn more about the Rangers, but it's just not worth the slow pace and the nothing happening. And I know it's not a book that I really want to pursue when I spend the entire time counting pages instead of enjoying the book.
Yes. That whole, is this over yet? How much further do I have to go? How much more of this do I have to suffer through?
How many pages is it? 250 pages. The fact that I can pull that number off the top of my head is very revealing. Especially when I finished the book almost a week ago. And I still know 250 pages. One question you want to ask the author.
Why did you feel the need to over-explain all the conversations?
Yeah, it was a poor writing choice. The one problem I have with it is I can't think of a question because he over-explains everything. And I guess any curiosity I have just gets bogged down with all this information I don't care about.
I don't care. Please stop.
I'm not a person that likes books that sole purpose is to set up for another book, which is what this feels like. It feels like purpose of this book is to set up for the second book, which just makes it a waste of a book.
Especially coming from Harry Potter that we just finished for a bonus episode, and those kids are only 12 in the second book, and they have more personality and more spunk than the kid that is the main character in this book, who is 15.
And then in our next book, it has such better pacing. It's so fast-paced. I forgot how fast-paced it is because so much happens so quickly. And that's very good. That's Agatha Christie's writing style. And I can get having a slower pace, but this book is info dumps and a little bit of action and then info dumps, which is very unfortunate because there is a good book in here, but it is smothered.
It's underneath all of the info dumps and the over explanations.
And so all the questions I have are more about his writing style and his choices and hoping that he improved going forward more than actual questions about the book.
I have no questions about this book. It was all explained to me.
And great detail. So I'd probably give it a missing the target out of 10. So close, but it missed it completely.
I'd give it a video games are more interesting than this book out of, yeah.
I am kind of, and like I said, it must be the time period, 2005. The market wasn't nearly as oversaturated with these types of books as it is now, but I am kind of surprised it went on to be as successful as it did.
He had to have gotten better.
He had to have. That's all I can think. Is they read the first book, the market wasn't oversaturated, so it'd be new enough to be like, oh, this is interesting, and then you go on to read the next book. But we've gotten to the point where we're 15 years later, there's a bunch of books like these. Like I mentioned, dystopias are basically this book, except this one has a fantasy paintbrush on it. If I was going to read something about the choosing days and then craziness happening, I'd rather read City of Ember or The Giver, which says something as someone that doesn't like dystopians. But I just think that the trope fares better in a dystopian setting than it did in this fantasy setting.
I've seen this trope work in other fantasy books. I think it's partly because of how the author executed it.
Because it wasn't interesting. All the other jobs were boring. I wasn't glad that George got a scribe job. That's boring. No one cares.
Good for you, George.
Yeah, so glad you got to go write things and law and talking to people. Cool. That sounds terrible.
Your friends, I'm sure, care about you, but as a character in a book, good luck, man.
They don't, though. It feels like no one likes George.
The girls do. The girls begrudgingly care about George.
Oh, goodness.
Ginny's too nice to not care about George.
That's true. Ginny's very sweet.
She's the best character in the book. I want a book that it's just Ginny.
That would be cool. Or Elise. I would be cool with Elise. I think that would be pretty interesting.
Just the girls.
Just the girls. Thank you so much for listening. You can keep up to date with us by checking us out on Twitter or Instagram, and you can help support our podcast by checking out our Patreon, where for just $1 a month, you can get access to our bonus episodes, where we look at movie adaptations to some of our favorite books. This month, we're looking at the second book in the Harry Potter series, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets.
Join us next time when we'll be going through a wonderful mystery, And Then There Were None, written by Agatha Christie.
Wonderfully dreadful.
Wonderfully dreadful.
Thank you again so much for hanging out with us today. I'm Sam Reiner.
And I'm Lizzie Sawyer.
And we hope to see you and a friend here next time.